I had become a mom. I have 2 daughters. It's one thing to spend a lot of time away from them working. It's another to spend almost 3 hours a day in the car here in Atlanta, as people would know. And coming into 2013, 14, somewhere along the way, I didn't love it anymore. But the attorney who thought she would die in a courtroom at 100, you'd be wheeling me out, suddenly didn't feel that way anymore. And that was a big surprise to me.
Welcome to Second Act Stories, a podcast where we profile people who have made major life and career changes and are pursuing a more rewarding life in a second act. I'm your host, Scott Merritt.
And I'm Scott's co-host, Andy Levine. Scott, today's interview took place in your own backyard of Atlanta, Georgia. Tell us about your interview with Rachel Humphrey.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rachel was a litigator. She had a law career that she loved, but at some point along the way, she found a new passion in becoming a champion for women in leadership. She was an incredibly talented attorney, and it turns out she's also a really gifted public speaker, which is great for our purposes. But she's also the embodiment of how passion can drive someone to a meaningful second act.
All right, here's Rachel Humphrey's second act story.
At some point, I tell this story a lot, but in the second grade, I wanted to be either a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader or a long haul trucker. I thought that they were both equally exciting, keeping in mind in the 70s, we had no internet. We got 3 TV channels if it was sunny outside, 1 radio channel. So just hadn't been to the movies ever, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to other things. And then 2 years later, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I don't know why. I can only guess that Night Court and LA Law and TV that was coming into the house seemed exciting to me.
I asked what kind of law she was most interested in exploring.
When I first went to law school, I was very interested in prosecuting sex crimes. But along the way, I realized that I really wanted to go into criminal defense. And when I graduated from law school, that is what I did. I spent a couple of years doing that exclusively. And then fate stepped in and I fell in love with a boy who wanted to relocate to Atlanta. The legal market here was very different. And so I got a job as a trial lawyer here with a firm doing all civil work. So I spent the next 16 plus years doing all trial work for small to mid-sized businesses.
Did you miss anything about criminal defense?
Everything. Maybe not everything, a lot.
What was so appealing about it?
I think you go to the basics, the Constitution, the innocent until guilty, having a system in place. When you look around other countries in the world, to have a system in place that guarantees certain protections, it feels as though there is a lot of, we now see that there's a lot of wrongful convictions, and there was just something about the ability to change lives. And sometimes, changing lives by turning people's lives around. While we did a lot of very violent street crime, people that would never see freedom again, there were also a lot of people that would never go back down that road. And so there was a real ability to impact people's lives for the better.
Is there a greatest victory in criminal defense that stands out?
There's a lot of victories of different levels. I think one of the longest life lessons that I had a judge early on who agreed to a sentence in a case of a lifelong drug user and dealer to a rehab facility after almost 20 years, a criminal record, probably one of the longest I've ever seen, but put him into rehab for the first time ever coming before the system. And he did it, he said, because of my credibility and because I asked. And I knew in that moment that your credibility and your integrity in any career that you were in could have the ability to change the course of your career and other people's lives as well.
So you make the move to Atlanta.
We do.
And then you move into civil litigation?
Yes.
Okay. What did that entail? What was different about that from what you were doing?
I think I was a very good trial lawyer. And so I'm a hard worker. I am always incredibly well prepared. I knew facts. I present very well in court, whether it's a jury or a judge. But we represented businesses that were generally involved in business disputes. It was my first foray actually into the hospitality industry because I represented a lot of hotel owners, a lot of franchisees, which is kind of a niche practice in the U.S. But really just any company that had disputes over just about anything.
Let's talk about the through line of hospitality in your practicing law. Obviously, that made an impact on the way the rest of your life would go.
Yes.
So what was it about the hospitality industry that drew you in?
I think it's a couple things. I love the franchise model as a way for entrepreneurship in this country. The American dream is alive and well here, where anyone can own and operate a business. And I think that's a really exciting thing. I did a lot of alcohol beverage licensing. I like the dining scene here in Atlanta. I like the entertainment scene here a lot. So it just fit well with things that were personally of interest to me. I got to meet great people, go to a lot of great events.
So you're humming along. You have a career that's going really well.
I do.
And about 20 years in, something changed.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was instantaneous. I had become a mom. I have 2 daughters. It's one thing to spend a lot of time away from them working. It's another to spend almost 3 hours a day in the car here in Atlanta, as people would know. And coming into 2013, 14, somewhere along the way, I didn't love it anymore. But there, the attorney who thought she would die in a courtroom at 100, you'd be wheeling me out, suddenly didn't feel that way anymore. And that was a big surprise to me. I'd invested a lot of money in my education, a lot of time. At the time, I was 45 years old. I thought a 45-year-old woman has no marketable skills to do anything else. And maybe, quite honestly, not even to lawyers somewhere else. It felt to me like starting over would be incredibly difficult, but it was gnawing on me a lot. The passion and the feeling I had for the career that I had always wanted was not driving me the way that it had been.
So what are you thinking at that point?
Yeah, I'm doing the math in my head. How many more years? Do I have another 20 years? I had been practicing for 20, but if you think about retirement at 65, I knew I had another 20 years in. As I mentioned, I'd invested a lot. I probably had only paid off law school shortly before that time period. But I, interestingly, had never looked for a job with a job before. That's one of the things I now realize is so incredibly unique. I moved to Atlanta. My firm in Virginia knew that I was moving to Atlanta. So the idea of trying to find a different law job, while it occurred to me, I didn't really understand my character, my loyalty didn't really seem to think that that was an option for me. And so, while I talked to my husband a lot about it, I don't know that I thought I had options.
So how do you get to the point where you're facing down a significant career change?
Yeah. It was a Friday evening, and I got a call from our nanny at the time who said that she needed health insurance and she was going to go be a preschool teacher. And I did what every self-respecting parent that relies on an entire support system to help you raise your children. I sat in the parking lot and I sobbed uncontrollably at the prospect of hiring someone. And when I got myself together, I called my husband and I let him know. And he said, "Don't worry, we'll call an agency or get an ad together tomorrow." And I said, "I have another idea." And I came home and I said, "I think this is the moment. I think that perhaps I should resign from work and figure it out without a job and stay home for a short period of time." We weren't set up for it at all. We had debt. We had no savings. The girls were not in favor of it at all. They vetoed the option when I talked about it. But I really knew in my heart that this was the sign that it was time to figure things out. And so that's what I did. That was a Friday night. I went in on Monday and I gave notice. And I spent the next few months really doing a lot of soul searching.
I asked Rachel about the process of searching for the clarity that would lead to her next move.
I talked to everybody. I tried to figure out, was there anything I could do where I wouldn't be a lawyer? I also have financial responsibilities to my family, so I knew that I needed to continue to make money. And that's when I had a conversation that changed the course of everything.
Tell me about that conversation.
My oldest daughter was very involved at the time with Komen Atlanta here in Atlanta, and Cati Stone was the executive director of Komen Atlanta. And I reached out and I said, hey, I'm interested in exploring some nonprofit opportunities. Could I buy you a cup of coffee? And I did. And when I got there, she said, I don't know if you know this, but I used to be a trial lawyer. And I did not know that. And she said, there's a lot of transferable skills between trial work and association executive. And instantly there were two phrases I had never heard before: transferable skills and association executive. And the more we talked, I just felt excited in a way I hadn't in a long time. And I came home and I Googled association executive and I read about it. And I came across a posting by AHOA, which is the nation's largest hotel owners association. And I knew it very well from my lawyering days. They were looking for a franchise relations specialist, not a legal role at all. And in that moment, something just clicked and I reached out to them. I knew I was incredibly overqualified for what they were looking for. And to their credit, the head of HR and the then CEO of AHOA created an incredible executive opportunity for me, and that changed everything.
How hard is it to leave a financially rewarding career to ultimately pursue what's really just a passion?
Certainly, I was getting paid. When I accepted that opportunity, it was a paid role, and I didn't know that it would be a passion. I didn't know if I would be successful at it. I had a tremendous amount of self-doubt and insecurity. I'd never worked at a company before. Law firms are run in a completely different manner than the corporate world. I used to come home every night and ask my husband what I thought were ridiculous questions about how companies run, because I really didn't even know the basics of it. I'd only had the one career as an attorney. But it also took that curiosity into the workplace, and that's where I got to ask questions. That led to a new opportunity to become the chief operating officer at AHOA, which eventually led to my role as the interim president and CEO there. So I won't say that the day I walked in, I knew it would be a passion or I knew it would change the course of everything, but it quickly became evident that it was a tremendous fit for me.
You mentioned self-doubt.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about how you reconcile self-doubt when you're entering a brand new career and you're making a huge transition.
I think I turned to the only strategy I knew, which was the same as when I was lawyering, which was to become an expert at the subject matter, to become a relationship builder with the people around me, to ask a lot of questions, to learn everything I could. I started doing a lot of networking, which is something I'm incredibly uncomfortable with. I had never had to do before in my legal profession, but I still have, self-doubt every day. I have it today sitting talking to you. I take the stage a lot. I do a tremendous amount of public speaking. I have it every single time I'm asked to speak at something. I'm not sure that goes away. It's just learning how to manage through it.
Rachel rose through the ranks and ultimately became interim CEO of AHOA. That's when she began to notice a problem plaguing the hospitality industry that needed to be addressed.
One of the really fascinating awakenings, if you will, that I had in hospitality, when I came up as a female lawyer, I really didn't participate in the female bar. I didn't go to a lot of the women's networking events. There was something for me, and I'm nothing against anyone who finds a lot of value in that. I felt somehow like people were telling me that I needed special treatment. I needed to be seen as a female trial lawyer in a universe there were very few of us for a long time. Right. When I got to the hospitality industry, it was very different. And what I was finding was that when I first had the COO title, there were not a lot of women in the C-suite. And suddenly there I was with an opportunity to speak and do other things that I was being asked because I was a female and there were diversity targets. And then when I became the CEO of AHOA, the same thing. I was on a lot of CEO panels and I was doing other things, but it was the same 4 or 5 of us at every conference, in every magazine article. And I very quickly realized that the hierarchy, hospitality, which is a very diverse industry at the entry level, is much less diverse as you go up the pyramid. And so it became evident to me that I had relationships and a reputation and a title and pedigree that would allow me access to influence to try to elevate a lot more women in the hospitality industry into executive leadership.
You got motivated to do something about it.
I did.
So what was that next step?
I retired from the executive job that I had after 7 years there. But within a very short time after that, I started to notice that there were a lot of very high-level leadership announcements that were where the people being named to those positions looked just like everybody else who held all of the rest of the positions. And so initially, I made a couple of phone calls to see if I could volunteer some time with some organizations that I knew were doing some work in this space. And I quickly learned my operational hat, went off the efficiencies hat, and said, I'm not sure that these organizations are talking with each other, and maybe we could move the needle a little bit farther and a little bit faster. And so I reached out to initially 5 organizations, and I asked them if they would jump on one phone call with me, and they did. And we instantly knew that we were onto something. And about a year and a half later, we're 30 organizations strong now. We have the ability to amplify one another's messages and are starting to see tremendous momentum within the industry across all levels, whether it's through brands or ownership, executive roles, and a real opportunity to impact the face of the industry forever.
So you saw something that somehow nobody else saw, that there was a need for collaboration among all these different organizations that all had similar missions, but they weren't working together.
I don't know that nobody saw it. Nobody else had done it. I'll say that.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And just to be clear, because I don't know that we necessarily mentioned it.
Yeah.
Your organization is called the Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance.
It is.
Okay. And so that is the organization that brings together everybody with similar missions
Right.
to increase diversity in hospitality.
Yeah, so the goal is that each of these organizations will continue to do its own great work, but through collaboration with the other organizations, then we can, like I said, amplify one another's messages and try to move that needle a little bit farther.
Is there anything specific about the hospitality industry that makes it harder for women to get ahead?
I don't know if it's something specific about the hospitality industry. There are certainly industries doing it much better than the hospitality industry is doing it. But I think like many things, when we are, there has not been necessarily succession planning that involves women. There's a lot of other challenges to.
So what has WHLA accomplished to date? It's only a 2-year-old organization, right?
It is. I think the great thing we continue to do is come together to communicate with one another. Like I said, we grew from 5 organizations to 30 very quickly. Watching those organizations collaborate with one another on content and conferences and resources and all of these things is tremendous. We're working on an initiative now of increasing the representation on stages across industry conferences, of having more women, because it's not only a reflection of the industry, but it's a critical part of elevating women's careers.
What would you say is the biggest leadership challenge that women face?
Probably advocating for ourselves. We hear over and over again, we're really good at advocating for other people, but not good at advocating for ourselves. You hear this all the time, that men will apply for a job if they think they check 6 out of 10 boxes. Women want to check 9 or 10 before they'll even submit a resume or an interest for a role. And it's that type of thing of not stepping up and asking for opportunities.
How does somebody with no experience get to a point where they can find an opportunity? What do they need to do in order to convince somebody that they're worth taking a chance on?
That's a tough one, because not everybody is open to that idea. So I think you really have to find the right leader, because that's the leader you're going to want to work for at the end of the day. I think that, when I have asked the former CEO at AHOA many times about me and the future opportunities, becoming COO, him recommending me to be interim CEO when he took a new opportunity. His feeling was that he was doing himself a favor. He wanted to bring on someone that he saw that skill in. And that's something that I've always looked for in hiring. It's much less about the resume. I think you can teach people all kinds of skills. It's does someone have the fire, the interest, the work ethic, the curiosity to really develop into that type of leader.
How did your law career prepare you for what you're doing today?
I think a lot of things. Preparation, again, there was never anybody who was going to step in a courtroom more prepared than I was. That same thing is true today. If I'm having a meeting, if I'm speaking at something, if I'm doing an interview, I'm always going to be prepared. It is a very high pressure environment in the courtroom. And so I think that definitely has taught me a lot of management skills. Thinking on your feet for certain. You see all the TV shows about cross-examining witnesses, listening. I can pick up on things now when people are talking in meetings because I'm so adept at listening to witnesses during a trial, learn things. That art of persuasion that I talked about, so much of any corporate career is the ability to influence and persuade others, oftentimes without them even knowing you're doing it.
Right,
That's definitely
right.
a trial skill. I mentioned credibility earlier, knowing how important my character is. It mattered to me every day that I was honest and truthful in a courtroom with the judges, with clients, with juries, and I know that I carry that forward today. So, there's a tremendous number of things that I really think were critical in my trial career that are equally important to me today.
What's the best advice that you could give to somebody who is considering a second act career, but maybe is apprehensive about making that leap?
I think coming from someone who considers myself very risk averse, the greatest rewards for me have always come from the biggest risks. So I would just say, just jump. Don't jump uneducated about it or willy-nilly, but just push yourself out of that comfort zone and take the risk. Because the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work out and you do something different. But the best thing is that you have this unexpected, unmatched second act that will be more fulfilling than you ever could have imagined.
Scott, I want to thank you for another awesome interview with Rachel. Two observations and things that I wanted to just sort of explore with you a bit. The first one is we've established that 40% of second acts are preceded by a traumatic event. Rachel's event was the loss of a nanny that preceded her second act. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's certainly a new one, but I think the point here is that we never know what kind of trauma is caused by any given event, right? If you're a parent who has a nanny that you rely on to take care of your kids and then that nanny disappears for any reason, that's a pretty traumatic event, and it can really be the catalyst for exploring what you're going to do next. So that's what happened in Rachel's situation. She used it as the event that would kind of lead her to figuring out where to go from here.
And the second interesting part of this story, and there are many interesting parts, but I'll just pick on one here, is about the importance of networking when exploring a second act. Talk about her meeting with Cati Stone of the Susan Komen Foundation.
Yeah, this is super interesting because she just happened to know Cati for any variety of reasons, but she didn't know when she started talking to Cati that Cati also used to be an attorney. And she made a pretty significant career transition and became a nonprofit leader. That was news to Rachel, and it was sort of this crazy kismet that it was like, oh my God, right? Like, I'm talking to the exact right person, and she had all this unbelievably on point advice and was able to help Rachel make that next step just because she'd done it before.
And now they both are association executives.
And now they're both association executives. How about that? Well, you can learn more about Rachel's organization, the Women in Hospitality Leadership Alliance, at www.whlalliance.org.
All right. Over the past 5 years, we've featured probably about a dozen episodes with former attorneys who have left the law for a second act. I want to share just 3 of them that you might want to check out if this topic is of interest to you. The first one is a recent one, Stuckey's Gamble. Stephanie Stuckey cashes in her future to revive her family's iconic roadside brand. That was in February of 2024 with Scott. Lawyer to Clown to Children's Musician, Robert Markowitz's Unusual Journey. That was from September of 2023. And finally, one from way back in the archives in January of 2018, From Big Law to Methodist Minister. It was actually the second episode that I've ever recorded.
Wow, that's digging deep, but it's still a good one. Well, we hope you'll keep listening and subscribe to Second Act Stories on your favorite podcast app. Like us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, leave us a review, and share us with your friends. Don't go away. There are more Second Act Stories just around the corner.